We're going to be live in 1 minute.
If you're here, you get asked questions.
The time is now 3:30. We'd like to call to order this Ordinances Advisory Board meeting. First thing we have on the agenda is the call to order and roll call. It looks like everyone is here. And we would like to welcome our new board members, Jake Palillo, Michael Pollard, and Scott Harrington. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, my very first meeting was virtual, and so it was a little challenging. So what I would like to do for just a few minutes is to everyone to introduce yourself, whether you've just gotten here or whether you've been here a little bit, just so everyone can have a lay of the land here. It'll go very quickly, I promise. So, Frank, can I start with you down there on that end?
Yes, ma'am. My name is Frank Gammon. I'm on this board as the representative from the planning board. I've been here for 4 years, and I've been on the planning board just a little longer than that.
I'm Harrison Whitaker. I've been here for a year, I guess. Doesn't seem like it, but that's what it is. So glad to be back.
Scott Harrington, new member, been here about 20 minutes. Looking forward to the next 20.
I'm Jake Palillo. I'm a new member as well.
I'm Joe Klutz, and I'm in my first year. It seems like maybe 6 months to 6 years. I can't quite say, but I'm a relatively new member.
I'm Michael Pollard, and I'm also part of the freshman class.
Matthew Jones, and I think I'm 5+ years at this point.
I'm Kathy Jones. I'm a little over a year.
Y'all are way more efficient than I had counted on. Okay, I am Amy Holman. I have been here a year. I am your chair. Kathy is your vice chair. There were a few words that I wanted to say beforehand. I feel like now I have an echo that I've never had before. I was prepared, except when I printed off what I wanted to say, it is still sitting at home with the dog. So we're just going to have to do the best we can. First, I wanted to say thank you to Matt Jones, our former chair. You were professional and welcoming. You entertained opinions that didn't always jibe with your own, and you were always gracious. And clearly, you went above and beyond. I cannot fill your shoes because I can't wear your style of shoes. But I am grateful for your leadership as a member of this board and as a lifelong resident of this town. Okay.
Thank you.
I'd like to take a few minutes. As I said, I wanted you guys to introduce yourself because I wanted to know why it is that we're on this board, but we'll get to that, I guess, as we go along. I am excited to look forward to the future of this board. I appreciate the town and the town board seeing the value of citizen input for allowing us the opportunity to play a role in the planning of this town. Thank you for recognizing that the Ordinance Advisory Board is an indispensable part of our local governance. My two goals in leading this board are efficiency and education. A quick reminder, why this board operates under a limited time period intentionally. When this board was created, the start and end time during the workday were intentional so that the planning staff didn't have to work another nighttime meeting. And that was important to them. So the 3:30 to 5 o'clock is a pretty hard time. I say that to remind us to come prepared and ready to discuss. When you look over your agenda and documents at home, go ahead and send questions to the planning staff and to me so that everybody can be prepared, because the things that you have questions on are probably going to be things that someone else needs to consider too, and it'll just save us some time. Our homework will facilitate our discussions. Let's see. As a former national board certified teacher, I believe there's a lot we can do to educate the public and educate ourselves. We don't have many public comments in this setting, so that's good. But I watch a lot of town public meetings, and I encourage you to do so also, so you can see how what we do here is also part of the overall process. This week's planning board had many comments where the planning staff got pretty beat up about what they believe that the staff should do in order to get developments going. And we have the opportunity to listen and share what we've learned. We have the opportunity to ask the right questions, to help the staff, and to help residents too operate to continue to make Huntersville one of the hottest zip codes around. My first meeting was virtual, and it was challenging enough, and I kept really quiet because I was just worried about how I was going to manage the computer and all that stuff, and make sure the dog didn't get in my video. But after that first video, Commissioner Munger said to me that I needed to make sure to speak up, because he knew that one of the particular topics we had talked on I knew a lot about, and that I had not said very much. And the only way that the commissioners and other folks know what we have to say from this table is that what's in the minutes. And so what we say is very important for that reason. The copies of our minutes go to the planning board, and they go to the board's town board, so they can decide, make their decisions based on, what we've had to say, not just the final vote. So please be sure to say the things that you think are relevant for these topics. Having said that, what we come up with are recommendations. They're not decisions. And so it's okay if we want to say, yeah, we think that the town board needs to look at this and not just us, because ultimately we're just saying that the elected people need to consider this, and that's good. So keep that in mind, and I'm going to say this to as much to myself as anyone else. It's good from the planning board, so it's good for us. We will discuss, and sometimes we will disagree strongly about topics, but we're going to leave those disagreements on the ball field, so to speak. We're just going to leave that and get on with our business the way we need to. I remind you that we're going to operate respectfully. We have Robert's rules, which I have brushed up on. And when we return each month, we will pick up anew. These discussions are good for our town, and they won't be personal. Section 430 of Robert's rules states that we will not address one another personally, nor will we attack nor impugn one another's motives. So with that, I thank you for this opportunity and for all that you're committed to this town and to this Ordinance Advisory Board, so let's get to work. Okay. This part's new. I need someone to make a motion to approve the minutes from last month's meeting.
I recommend we approve the minutes for the February meeting.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second to approve the minutes. Let's go ahead and take the vote to approve the minutes. Vote yes. Vote in the affirmative. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And Frank, did you have it? Okay. 9-0. It passes. Yes? No, okay, good. Do we have any public comments today? Okay. So we'll get right to the action agenda. 4A is to consider a recommendation on petition TA 2215, a request by the Huntersville Planning Department for a text amendment to Article 7, landscaping and open space, to update penalties for removal damage of required vegetation. Staff?
All right, it is great to see you all. For the new members, this is I don't think this is working. It was on, yeah. Here we go. Oh.
Hang on, here we go.
Okay. Okay, so for the new members, I am Kaylee, and I'm with the planning department. I am a planner one. And I'm going to be presenting TA 2215 vegetation penalty. The proposed amendment is to codify how to determine the monetary amount of tree fund contribution in lieu of planting, and also to increase fines for disturbance/removal of required vegetation. Stuff like tree save, undisturbed buffers, street trees, open space. We click. The amendment was prompted by a citizen asking the town to compare the dollar amount of our monetary penalties for disturbance/removal of required vegetation to other nearby communities as they felt ours seemed low in comparison. The current monetary penalty is $2 for every square foot of area of damaged or destroyed vegetation, not to exceed $30,000 payable to the town. The $2 per square foot was imposed in 2003 and has not been increased since. Based on the research conducted, staff recommends increasing the dollar amount per square foot from $2 to $5 to keep up with inflation and be comparable to our surrounding communities. So Section 1 of the amendment deals with tree preservation, protection, and removal. And here you see Section F, which details the minimum amount of tree preservation required by zoning district. Footnote 2, highlighted in the chart, deals with tree preservation mitigation. The added language is to codify how we determine the amount of contribution to the tree fund in lieu of planting if conditions on site are not suitable for healthy tree replacement. 3 estimates of the cost of the vegetation plus installation shall be obtained, and the average of those 3 estimates will equal the amount of contribution to the tree fund. Okay, Section 3 of the amendment is to update the monetary penalty for any violation of Article 7, not just removal or disturbance of tree preservation or undisturbed buffers. The current penalty is $2 for every square foot of area damaged or destroyed, not to exceed $30,000. And staff is proposing to increase the fine to $5. The other notable change in this section is the addition of a cumulative fine for area damage that is within tree preservation and the undisturbed buffer. All right, so I have a scenario of kind of the impact of the changes. Tim cuts down a specimen tree that is in required tree preservation area and required undisturbed buffer. The area damaged is 1,000 square feet. So under our current penalties, you would take that 1,000 square feet and times that by $2, and you get $2,000 as your total fine for the specimen tree removal within the required tree preservation and within the undisturbed buffer. Under the proposed penalties, in the same scenario, if Tim cuts down a specimen tree in tree preservation and undisturbed buffer, the area damaged is 1,000 square feet. You take that area and you multiply that by $5, and then you get $5,000 for the specimen tree removal within a required tree preservation area, and then another $5,000 fine for tree removal within an undisturbed buffer. And so your total fine would end up being $10,000. And staff is hoping for a recommendation today, but if you guys If y'all need more time to decide, that is fine as well. So please let me know what questions you have. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Well, having worked on the previous tree mitigation piece, this is probably more of a statement than a question, but I guess it could turn into a question, is that it doesn't say this here, and I don't think it says it anywhere in the zoning ordinance. It implies it, but the intent of all this is to save existing trees. And if you can't save those trees because you have to build, so I mean, some trees got to be moved, you either can replace those trees when a tree cannot be saved, and this, with all this, the things we're going to talk about today. And the other one is the tree fund. But that's the last resort, trading trees for money. Because what I've heard in the past and what I believe is we don't want the money. We want the trees either left alone or replaced.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me go back to Frank's point. Again, I'll just reiterate, it does say if site conditions are not conducive for healthy tree replacement. So there is that stipulation in there. Like Frank said, we don't just want people giving us checks because they don't have, they just don't want to put the trees there, essentially, or keep the trees.
Michael?
It kind of stands out to me. You showed that the increase on the actual penalty goes to $5, but yet the not to exceed has remained the same as it was in 2003.
Correct, and that is pretty comparable from what we found with other communities. There are some who have gone up to like 50,000 or possibly even more if you're looking at an area like Davidson. But with us kind of doubling up on the fine in these certain situations, we feel like that's appropriate, and we feel like the $30,000 is still appropriate to keep.
Scott?
My question is, I'm a board member of an HOA, and so we have tree save and preservation areas, and so I'm aware of the, the rules we have to maintain. But in the math, which I wasn't a great mathematician in high school, where's the 1,000 square feet coming from? Is that the canopy of the tree?
Correct. So in this case, if it was a tree, it would be that canopy area, which in another section of Article 7, we have a section that talks about how to estimate canopy area. So that is kind of where I took that 1,000 square feet from.
Other trees underneath it, we're just looking at the canopy, which is one way of thinking of as the size of the tree or the value of the tree in terms of coverage.
So in this case, the example is specific to one specimen tree, so that 1,000 square feet would be that specific canopy area. But you could have multiple trees in one area that are removed and it be a much larger square footage. So if they're removed all in the same area, then we would take the area of all those trees together.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, where does this money go when you get it?
So it goes into the tree fund, which we use at later dates to plant trees elsewhere throughout the town.
Second question, if the tree is taken out of an area that's not conducive to growing trees, why is it a tree area? Why is it designated as a tree area? I mean,
Read the language. So it does also say when it prevents locating the required tree plantings or preservation standards. So I believe that what they're saying is when you're in the process of looking at that tree preservation area, it would come up that that was not a suitable site to be used. Correct me if I'm wrong with that.
A lot of times, just so, this is when we have our buffers are all undisturbed buffers. This is like if a guy accidentally had his bulldozer go 5 feet into the undisturbed buffer, we need to replace those trees that were naturally occurring. You may have the installation of a swale, there may be a retaining wall nearby, things that you would not want to replant in that area. for future considerations.
Okay, but he would still be charged for the,
Absolutely, absolutely. When we take that money and we'd use that in the tree fund bank for street trees for downtown, street trees for parks, all kinds of different places.
okay. So there's no correlation between the actual fine and what it actually costs to replace the tree? It is just a.
This is a fine, correct?
Yeah, a
Now,
fine.
There's another scenario for specimen tree. So there's canopy, there's two things. There's canopy and there's count. So you're gonna get a fine for the canopy and then you get a fine for the count. So there could be, if you have to, if let's say a 36-inch oak, that's roughly 18 trees. So you'd have to pay for those 18 trees as well. So you get fined for the damage and fined for the replacement trees as well. And all those monies would go into the tree fund bank.
Is that in here somewhere about the additional trees? I don't quite follow you with, you got an 18-inch oak and you're gonna charge him for how many trees?
18.
So under the last sentence in this second paragraph, under 7.9, it does say that in addition, any tree, shrub, or required vegetation that has been removed or destroyed shall be replaced in accordance with an approved revegetation plan. And so what the other article is saying is if you do that tree fund contribution, that letter of estimation is going to be for how many trees were removed or what kind of shrubs. And so you would have to pay for that into the tree fund, and then you would still also get the $5 fine.
For every square foot?
Yes.
But all that's a total of a maximum of $30,000. Or does the $30,000 only apply to one of those?
Not the tree replacement. So whatever it costs to replace the trees in the installation, that's what it costs. Whether it be 50, anything over 30, it would be allowed. But the
Just to clarify, this is when you have someone double dipping into an area. There are buffers that are not necessarily specimen tree or canopy related, okay? It's when you double dip, that's what, we try to put it as plain English as we could, but it's when you double dip, that's where the confusion typically comes in. So you could have an undisturbed buffer that does not have canopy requirements or it does not count towards your specimen tree requirements, okay? So we did our best to put it in as plain English as we could.
So when we talk about undisturbed or riparian buffers, the state also has authority in those areas. Is that a fair statement, or?
Correct.
So, so is this in addition to, so if the state issues a notice of violation for going in and impacting a buffer, a riparian buffer, then the town is in addition to that, right?
Those riparian buffers are typically around water bodies. We're talking about more like the perimeter of a project, like a subdivision buffer or zoning buffer between uses.
But to follow up that piece on that question was, along I-77, the state has required buffers along the interstate, correct?
No, we do.
We do, okay.
50-foot buffer.
That's fine, that clears that up. I just want to be clear on another item. A minute ago, you talked about someone with a bulldozer who disturbs the required buffer. But this also applies to a resident, let's say, of a residential area who has a required 20-foot buffer between, adjacent to their property that's between their property and the adjacent development. If they disturb that buffer,
That could happen.
they could also be fined to
Typically,
these
yeah,
standards.
it's typically an HOA land, so we would coordinate with the HOA.
Okay.
Yeah, that wouldn't be on private property. It would be-
No, no.
Make a motion to approve the revised fine.
Hold on just 1 minute.
I've got a couple of questions before we go there, if we can.
Yeah, do we have one clarification on the fine? The civil fine actually goes to the down, which then gets passed on to the school system. That's correct. And then, but when the tree replacement for the tree, specimen trees, that comes into the tree bank, to the tree fund. So the penalties could actually get split. So in this scenario, I have an undisturbed buffer, I disturb 1,000 feet, and it's a $5,000 fine. That $5,000 ends up in the school system. If I'm in there and it just happens to be a undisturbed buffer, also a tree save, there's a specimen tree, we would take the monies for the specimen tree. That would go to the tree fund, but the other $5,000 would go to the school system.
Can we address the fact we have a motion on the floor? We don't have the second yet, and we still need to at least put that down.
I also have some additional
Okay,
questions.
yeah, there's still a few more questions, so
Second.
thank you.
May I ask my questions?
Yes, please,
Okay.
go ahead.
Yeah, I was saving these questions. Give me a second, pull them up. All right, can't pull my question up, but I know what it is. One is, I want to ask a question about, because I've seen this before, it came through planning board, an instance where you had a protected area and a residential area. And the residents there were clearing out invasive trees and shrubs from in there, and there was a possibility they were going to be fined for that. Is there any latitude in our rules about, even though you have a required area, that invasive species can be removed? And I'll use an example, a Chinese privet stays green all year long, and there's certain species in North Carolina that their time to grow is when the leaves don't have trees on them, and the Chinese privet blocks the sun from those, and those native species die out. Whereas if you remove the Chinese privet, then the native species can flourish. So is there any latitude in our zoning ordinance to allow that type of clearing? Where they would not be fined?
We allow like selective clearing for kudzu, invasive species, those types of things, but you're not going to come in with a bulldozer and clear out a hole. But you're allowed to, selectively go in with, typically it's manual labor, if not a small bobcat, depending on the situation, can navigate in.
So if someone were to, so to carry this question furthermore, if someone came and complained about this and the planning department sent out an inspector to check on this, once they found out what they were doing, that would be the end of it, it would be fine. They do not have to request to go into that area and clear out the invasive species.
Correct, yeah, correct.
So then that's fine.
9 times out of 10, they call us and ask if they can clear out, and we just confirm that it's a, Chinese privet or kudzu or poison ivy typically is what we see.
Right?
Bamboo, actually, we had a case a couple of years ago with some folks had planted some bamboo that had gone under. The shoots were popping up in the neighbor's yard, so they had to go get that eradicated.
Okay. And I think, and you may not have an answer for this today, because I didn't, with everything else going on this week, you didn't get a chance to send the questions, but I would like to see some examples of enforcement that have taken place within the last 6 months or so. If you don't have those, I'd like to see those at the planning board meeting.
I can tell you right, I've been here an awful long time. We have not had an enforcement case, and ironically, over the last 6 months, we've had 2 pop up. So we're working with a homeowner who then promptly sold their home, so we have to go after the new homeowner. And there was another one where a business, I won't name the business, immediately removed 2 of their specimen trees on site.
All right, so a follow-up question to that is then, is the reason we don't have as many is because you guys are short people to see those type of things, or they're not reported?
Ironically, we found out one because it was got held up because of a closing. That's how it was reported back to us. The other one, the business owner came in for an expansion, and we said, "Were your tree safe trees?" He said, "I cut them down." So it's a lot of it's self-reported or neighbor complaint-driven. We are due to our staff capacity. We try to keep an eye on where people are clearing. Our erosion control team does a fantastic job when they're out there in the field. Most of those things are all marked ahead of time, so they know their clearing limits, and they give themselves some grace so they don't get into these situations. Like I said, there's only 2 reported cases that I know of, and that's been 19 years now.
Right, and my last question is, the tree fund was mentioned. Yes. Who controls the tree fund?
The town.
Who in?
Planning staff.
Planning staff controls that. And I'd just like to say, have we used any of that money?
We have not yet, but we were clearing up, once the Main Street project's.
Yeah, I just, because I never,
We'll use it in parks, and we're gonna be using it on the Main Street enhancements.
right.
So the answer to the question is, not all of it, but we'll be using probably a fairly healthy amount of it on our Main Street update.
Do you know how much money is in there right now? No. That's a question. I understand you don't know,
Last
but,
I checked, it was 128, but that was.
all right, and then that's a question when it comes to the planning board I'd like to hear. Thank you very much.
That's everything.
I didn't notice in our package what enabling authority that we're using for this fee.
The state has given us special legislation from the state for tree safe.
Okay, I understand that. I think everybody on the board needs to get a copy of that and be afforded the opportunity to review it and make their own, ask questions, make their own assessments. So that relates to the preservation aspect. We need specific enabling authority for fines and monetary contributions and taxes, which that does not address. What are we using for that? What authority are we assuming?
I'll refer to the legal department and we'll get you an answer.
Okay, next question. On the tree fund, how are we complying with rational relation? How is there a direct benefit back to the party that paid the money in?
They violate the ordinance, they get a fine. It's not to give them back it's not to give money back to them and collect it for that. They violated a code, and so they pay a fine for that. And then we utilize that money to provide tree plantings and other projects.
I would agree with you on that. I would agree with you on that. But what I'm talking about is money that is in lieu of planting trees.
Oh.
The in lieu of bit, there
Okay, so-
needs to be rational relation back to the party that paid in. How are we ensuring that that is occurring?
Gotcha. So right now, we'll put it in any of the projects around. So we have not put money that is right next to or in proximity to where those businesses are at when they can't plant it on their property. In most cases, if they cut down trees, they can put that planting back on their property. In some cases, they can't. And so we in those cases, we don't put it in a location that's adjacent to them.
Okay. Thanks for that. I think that's all I've got. Just, I think it would be helpful to everyone here to be able to review what we're assuming is the authority and then ask questions and, come up with their own opinions on it.
Harrison?
I don't really know where I want to go with this, to be honest with you, but I'm a little, the statement that one of the reasons we want to do this is because of inflation, and yet we're not taking this money and putting it right back into trees. I don't think that's a viable argument, that inflation is a reason for doing this. And I don't think we ought to use that as an excuse to doing it. If the fines are too low, it's just too low, let's raise them, not a problem. But it's not because of inflation, because we're putting the money in a fund. And if we're telling people you got to pay so we can replant the trees, we ought to be using that money in that fund.
We will. So does
yeah.
the Main Street projects, we can't plant trees during the construction of that. We'll have to wait till the construction.
Well, I understand, but there's other places in the city you probably could. All right, the next question is the tree preservation areas. All right, we got the buffers, we know about those. Okay. Last month, we talked about the 9-foot strip next to is that a tree preservation area?
No.
Okay.
It's a planting strip.
Okay. So if you cut a tree down in those, you're not getting fined for it?
Correct.
Okay.
That's because you're
to
building
know.
your road.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have a tree preservation.
There wouldn't be a
area
tree there.
Where your infrastructure's gonna be.
I'm talking about the current ones. I'm talking about
A street tree?
yeah.
If you cut a street tree down, when we come knock on your door, we're gonna ask you to replace your tree.
Okay. Is that in this?
No, you would replace the tree,
Okay.
like for like.
All right.
So if you had, an oak, we'd ask you to put back an oak or something similar.
Okay. And the other thing I'm a little concerned about is the money going to the school. Are they planting trees?
That is out of my purview. Can you, about the civil penalty and how that works, that's above my pay grade.
Why is the civil penalty for trees going to the schools, to the?
State did, yeah. Yeah, that's state mandated.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Typically, it's just questions at this point before the motion is made, and then after the motion is the discussion, so, okay. Commissioner Munger.
Yeah, one of my main questions was asked earlier in terms of the number of times this has actually occurred, and I heard it was 2 within the last 6 months. My question on those is going to be kind of multiple going on here, but do we know what the maximum amount of fine that we've assessed or indicated we would assess on that, and what is the average, since I guess there's only 2, divide the 2 by 2, and then I have a
No,
follow-up
we have-
question.
Yeah, we have not assessed the penalty yet. We're working with the property owner to find out what, in the commercial, we're trying to find out ultimately what his decision is going to be with his expansion plans, and then look at from there. But it will be a penalty related to the size of the trees. For the homeowner, unfortunately, the property owner at the time when we found out about the penalty has sold the home and left. So we're now we're having a kind conversation with the new property owner, and we will work with them to the best of our capabilities. Okay. So we get to go meet them later this week.
All right.
Sure.
And the other question is, I guess, about the tree funding. So we talked about how some of that money's been used for other things, and yet we've never done a fine. So how else is the tree fund funded?
Great. So when properties get developed and you cannot replant on-site, we have a mitigation option, and that's how the tree fund has been funded to date. It's been mitigation of specimen trees. Typically commercial projects to this day, but we do have a few residential projects. All right.
I got to ask one more question. So if a homeowner sells his home, this fine follows to the next homeowner?
Well, we're going to talk to our legal staff about all this. This is new. This is brand new territory for us. So. Yep.
We have a motion on the floor. Do we have any discussion, any points you want to make amongst yourselves?
I'm just really uncomfortable voting on something or make a recommendation without having all the material information, i.e. our enabling authority.
What is the difficulty voting on?
We don't have all material facts on this particular item. We don't have the source of our authority for everyone to review. And, you know, we have very specific authority that's granted to us by the state, and if we exceed that, that's going to create problems for taxpayers. So I think we need to have a copy of it and have a clear understanding of what that authority is, and make sure, and our bylaws even say it, we need to ensure compliance with authority. So I think everybody on the board needs to have a copy and be able to review it before we say, this is good to go.
But don't they already have the authority because they already have a $2 fine? So you're raising the fine from 2 to 5? So wouldn't they already have the authority in place to do this?
Well, I'll give you an example. System capacity fees, you're probably familiar with those. Everybody was doing them. They all had them in their ordinances, but they were deemed illegal. Charlotte Water just had to pay $106 million of those back. So just because we have it in the ordinance doesn't necessarily mean it's legal.
Okay, point of order. We need to let me call on you to speak, please. Okay, so any other discussion?
You got to do something with the motion.
I have a question for our legal counsel, town council. Okay. Is it safe to say that if the prior process was legal, that the current process is legal, or is that something that you will have to determine is that something that's yet to be determined?
I'm not sure how long did you say that the $2 fine had been in the ordinance for?
03.
2003, so about 20 years. As to the specific authority for the fines, the civil penalties, the $2, which they're proposing to bump up to $5, the town of Huntersville has specific local legislation for tree save regulations. And in the general statutes, there is also general authority, and that general authority is at 160D 702. And the general authority essentially allows for things that preserve, I don't have it in front of me, but it's very generic, let's say. And tree save has been found to help with flooding issues. It's been found to help with many things that help the town of Huntersville. And that general authority is what provides for the general tree save, if you say. But we also have the very specific local legislation that allows for it. And I don't have a copy of that in front of me. It should have been included in the agenda packet. I will agree with Mr. Jones on that. However, because this specific item has been discussed multiple times and had already been provided to the board on multiple times, I guess that was an oversight on our end, although we do have new members, so it would have been helpful for the new members to have that information.
Maybe intuitive, but does the authority also give you the authority to increase or change the amount as previously said in 2003?
Correct.
It does? Okay.
Any further discussion? Okay. I'm sorry, I wasn't prepared. Jake, can you repeat your motion, please? I know that's not quite.
Motion to approve the increase in fine.
Okay. So the motion on the table is to recommend the increase of the vegetation penalty.
Just for clarification, are you making a motion to approve all of the proposed amendments or only that specific amendment?
What are the other amendments? Wasn't it going from $2 to $5?
So we have the $2 to $5. We have how you determine your tree fund contribution as well. And then the cumulative fine for tree preservation and undisturbed buffer.
Yes.
Yes, anything underlined in bold.
Yeah, my motion is to approve all that. I mean, we've got fines that were put in place since 2006. It's 2024. Cost of replacement and all this stuff needs to go up.
Is there a second? There is a second from, you still good with all that? Okay. So we need to take a vote. All for the motion to approve, to recommend the vegetation penalties, the increase in penalties. Where is the underlined piece?
And the overlapping penalties.
Okay, yeah, the reference of TA 2215, thank you. All hands above for aye? Yes? Okay, nay votes? Okay, so 6-3, motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, okay. So we are at 4B, consider a recommendation on petition TA 2301, the request by the Planning Department for a text amendment on Article 7, Part A, landscape altering the spacing and location of required street trees and providing greater flexibility for the types of supplemental residential lot trees. Lauren, thank you.
Good afternoon, and welcome to our new members. Thank you. So I was with you last month about this. I'm going to do a brief recap. We also have our engineering and public works directors here, and they have some information to share as well. I'm happy to take questions, but it'll be a little bit more brief than last month. So text amendment 23-01 is with regard to street trees. So the Town Board of Commissioners tasked staff to look at our street tree requirements in response to some challenges that have been brought to light about the impact of the street trees on our public right-of-way. Possible alternatives that were previously mentioned include increasing funding for sidewalk maintenance, changing our design parameters, and reevaluating the space for street trees, location of sidewalk, and the type of tree provided. So how did we get here to this point? As mentioned previously, under the county zoning, developments like Northstone had sidewalk and a green zone on one side of the street, did not include a street tree. Under the 1996 ordinance, we have developments like Monteith Park that were developed with sidewalk on both sides, a green zone with street trees, and that was it's a 5-foot green zone. And then in 2003, the ordinance was amended to increase that green zone from 5 feet to 7 feet, which supports healthier tree growth. So at this point, we are looking to see what our community wants to do for the future. So in the past several years, as mentioned, there have been challenges presented with regard to the impact of street trees upon the public right-of-way. And the Town Board of Commissioners directed staff to work with this board to present an ordinance to improve those challenges. So we're at a unique point, and we want to just make the best choice for the future of our community. So the first issue that staff identified, as previously mentioned, was that we want to ensure during the plan review that the right tree is being planted in the right spot. So we're picking the right species, and we're evaluating where that species is going in relationship to required infrastructure. So during our plan review, our engineers are diligently looking to see if trees are being placed in sight lines, if they're being placed too close to stormwater infrastructure. And those are things that we have to look out more closely for in the future as planning is reviewing where those trees are proposed. Since the previous meeting, the planning department has begun working with an arborist to have a professional revision to our tree and shrub list so that we're picking species that are most appropriate for that green zone. There were some follow-up questions for staff from the last meeting with regard to what other municipalities that have a significant tree canopy do with regard to maintenance responsibility of the trees. And the municipalities that responded indicated that it's either the HOA or the property owner that are maintaining those street trees that are required. The only exception is if the street trees are in special districts. So some municipalities have historic districts, or they're like downtown commercial areas where they might maintain a small fraction of the street trees that are required in the municipality. And then with regard to the maintenance of the trees, the right-of-way, so repairs to the sidewalk, every municipality that responded said it is their responsibility to maintain any maintenance to sidewalks caused by damage from street trees. And then mitigation of impacts to the built environment. So other municipalities are looking just more closely at plan review, essentially. A couple have arborists on staff that look at the proposed landscaping plan during plan review, and they are specifically working with their developers to make sure that the right species are being picked and they're going in the right spots. And in other cases, planners are looking at that during plan review in those municipalities. I'm not going to read the proposal. I'm going to describe what it is in this drawing here. Okay. So under the current text amendment, the first section, I'll say, staff is proposing that small maturing trees be planted in the 7-foot green zone. And if a large maturing tree is planted, we are proposing that it be in a 9-foot green zone. And engineering and or public works are going to talk a little bit more about their preference. But what we did was we built a portion of that into an option 2. So the idea is you would have the alternative of a 5-foot green zone where you do not plant a street tree, and the tree that would have gone there would be planted in the private home lot. Staff is proposing that you only do that when the front yard exceeds a certain dimension. and I'll explain why. So most of our most recently approved developments, we're seeing generally no greater than a 20 or 20-foot depth front yard. And for these lots, you typically are required to have 1 yard tree already. And then you have your street tree that is in the green zone. If you move that large maturing tree from the green zone into the front yard, you're going to potentially create the same challenge that we're trying to avoid. So that's one consideration. And then the other section of the proposal is that we are proposing, regardless of what amendment is made with the street trees, that developers have the option, when you have a build-to range or setback that's 20 feet or less, to plant a small maturing tree, because currently you're only allowed to plant large maturing trees in that area. So this is separate of section 1. And then section 3 is an amendment to Article 5 to just be consistent with the proposed changes in Article 7. And I will.
Good afternoon. Stephen Trott with the Engineering Department. So self and Kevin with Public Works, we've been looking at this a little while, looking at maintenance costs, okay? And that was something that we were seeing, and we were thinking, are there different ways? Are there alternatives that the town would like to consider for challenges that we see, not at planting, but long-term maintenance? So the street tree issues aren't issues that pop up when they are planted, but over time, as the trees mature, those issues tend to grow, just like the trees. So when the trees do grow, there's potential impacts to the sidewalk and the stormwater system that the town maintains. There's also impacts to other infrastructure that other entities maintain, such as water lines, gas lines, or telecommunications lines. So as Lauren was mentioning, the current standard is to have a 7-foot planting strip, and that's the distance between the sidewalk and the back of curb, and a large tree goes there. As you see in the picture, this is what it looks like when they first plant it. There's plenty of room. Trees are small, don't cause much of an impact. As the trees grow, though, their trunks tend to get larger. This is an example. This is not in town, the picture, but our idea is to have no trees in that area, but have the trees in the front yard. So reduce that planting strip width, keep that sidewalk, but then have those trees in the front yard. Just as a possible alternative. That doesn't mean that's the only way. That's just one way that we thought of. So when you place trees behind the sidewalk, we're anticipating that that'll reduce the cost of the town to maintain the sidewalk and the stormwater system. It'll also reduce the right-of-way needed for new streets. When you have a 7-foot planting strip versus 5, well, that'd be 2 less feet on either side. So that'd be additional developable area that could be used for larger lot sizes, more lots. That'd be up to the developer to determine that. Also, as Lauren was mentioning, the HOAs or property owners maintain those trees. Well, if they're not out there, then that's less of a burden for the HOA to maintain. We also think it'd be easier for the homeowner to understand. From time to time, we do get calls from property owners asking us to come out and trim the street trees. As the ordinance indicates, that's for the property owner or HOA to do. And they are sometimes surprised to hear that, but we let them know. We also see that there would be reduced cost for street maintenance. So not sidewalk maintenance or stormwater maintenance, but actually for street maintenance. And if you have questions on costs, Kevin can probably talk more about that. But when you resurface a street, if the street trees are there and mature and have grown up, they grow out over the street. Well, they have to be a certain height so the equipment can get under there to resurface the street. So the town does from time to time have to come in and prune up or limb up the trees even more so that that equipment can get in there to maintain the street. Also, utility providers, they typically put their trees not under the street, some do, but they put them next to the street. Well, this is the same place where the street trees are. So your water lines, gas lines, telecommunications, they're all going generally in the same area. So if one of those breaks and they have to be repaired, they may have to take out the street tree to be able to do that. So that's increased cost and time for them too. When trees are next to the street, sight distance at intersections can be reduced with mature trees. When they're small, not so much, but as they continue to grow, it can lead to sight distance issues. That's something we look at in new developments now to try to reduce the number of trees around intersections. But again, as those trees grow, they can lead to challenges. We also spend a bunch of time, this is minor, this is not a big thing, but we do spend time reviewing plans for the street trees. And then say, nope, take that one out, put this one in, no, move that one. And then also in the field. So if trees are behind the sidewalk, then that would likely remove a lot of that time. There's also, and I've got some examples of some of these in some later slides, conflicts with streetlights. As the trees grow, they don't look at the streetlight and go, ooh, I can't grow there. They grow where they want to grow. And sometimes they grow around the streetlights. So then you have less light there. And then also for street signs. Also where you have, this is somewhat related, but just throwing up an example, where you have overhead utility lines and you plant trees right under those or right next to them, well, the utility companies are going to come through and prune them as they need to. So you may get some U-shaped trees in the future if you plant them under overhead utility lines. In new subdivisions, the utilities are underground, so this is not an issue, but along thoroughfares where the lines are currently overhead and stay overhead, it just creates more work or challenge. So I've got several slides here. These are just examples, some things to think about as you consider the matter. A couple of views down a street. This is, again, from Google Street View. Can you see the stop signs? Can you see the street name signs as you approach? Not so much. Again, as the trees mature. Street light here, you can see it now. The trees are new, but as the trees grow, it's probably going to grow and cover up that. We hope that they prune them back and keep it pruned. But as mentioned earlier, it's hard to get out everywhere all the time to see what's going on. And then also in this case, a tree was planted right at a stormwater inlet, so it increases the chances of there needing to be something. Yes, sir.
This is a great observation. So under the recommendation that the department is making, then there would be no trees here based on the design point you got. Is that right?
Based on the engineering recommendations, yes, but there are other options. The two other options, I guess option one, as Lauren presented, would be a small maturing tree, which I've got a picture example of that too, in a 7-foot area, and then a large tree in a 9-foot area. So in those two cases, this still could occur. And just putting up some other examples to think about. I'm not sure if Lauren had the same slide or not, but it looks similar. When the trees aren't around the street, you can see pedestrians have a lot better view, vehicles have a lot better view of what's coming along there. These are some examples in town. There are several subdivisions, and I think Lauren mentioned maybe 96 when the previous ordinance, or the original one when the county was doing it. There are several subdivisions. If you want to go out there and look and say, what does a neighborhood look like that may have something similar to this? Winfield neighborhood, Northstone neighborhood, Hamptons, Hampton Crossing. There's several in town, Burkdale, Melbourne. There's a number in town. If you want to go out and look and see what does a neighborhood look like that may have that standard of a 5-foot planting strip and then sidewalk next to it without a tree, there are several in town to go look at if you want to. This is actually a picture of Melbourne subdivision, same example. Another one here, I think this is the Hamptons neighborhood, or Oxfordshire. There may be What's that? Winfield? Thank you. Kevin knows all where everything is, so. Now, this is an example not in Huntersville, but what could streets like when you do have mature trees? When the trees do mature, and look, this is actually Glen Eagles in Charlotte. Pretty nice area. Again, just show an example what large trees behind the sidewalk could look like. Another example in Charlotte, Sharon Road. Again, once trees mature, they do grow up over the road. Certainly don't look like this at planting, but over time they do grow up over the street still. And this is an example just happened to run across in Charlotte where you've got small maturing trees on the one side of the street. What could that look like? Once those small trees mature, it looks like they have large ones behind the sidewalk. Just an example from Charlotte. This is an example, I guess, on the right side, the one with the car in it. Those look like small maturing trees is actually Farrelltown Parkway. And even with small trees, sometimes the street lights may have some conflicts. The ones on the other side, another street light potential conflict, this is Bellington subdivision. Again, we try to look at tree placement and street lights during the plan process, but it's challenging, and sometimes things don't get always built exactly like they are in the plan. A couple other examples, North Stone Hampton Crossing of what it looks like, again with the 5-foot planting strip without the street trees. Winfield, Hamptons, I mentioned these before. Again, once the trees mature, at initial planting, it doesn't look like this. It doesn't look like this at all. It looks pretty open, but as the trees mature, I think it can work. This is an example. This is what they look like when they are just planted in the planting strip. They look pretty small. They look like just new trees, but over time they do grow up. And one of the things we're thinking about engineering public works is not just what it looks like when it's planted, but what does it look like 30 years from now. And that's what I have. Be happy to answer any questions that folks may have.
Jake.
The slide you have right there is a prime example, I think, of what we don't want. Street trees, in my opinion, are a critical component to giving a street life and liveliness, and as they grow and the street trees grow and the canopies grow, they become more beautiful every day. The problem is that you should have 10 or 12-foot planting strips, get the sidewalks where people are walking further away, get the proper trees in, and create a beautiful streetscape that adds value, and make a minimum requirement to where they're putting trees in that are 4.5-inch caliper, minimum 12 feet, so that people are still alive by the time these trees create some canopy. If you took this same picture right here and substituted mature trees, that would look like $1 million compared to the issue that in several projects we've worked on is you need to have the proper planting strip. 5 feet is not enough. You need to have minimum 10 or 12 feet. You pull your sidewalks back. You can even increase the width of your sidewalk from 5 to 6 feet. It makes it safer and more walkable for people, kids with strollers and bicycles. And at the end of the day, as your community matures, it becomes more beautiful every day. If you put the street tree behind the sidewalk, then you need adequate space between the sidewalk and the face of the house so that the street tree is at least 6 foot off the sidewalk. If you cram it in, the next thing you know, you got branches and you're creating destruction to the houses. And then you don't have any consistency. This guy's tree's here, this one's over here, this one's here. I mean, when you go down in South Charlotte and you go into some of those scenarios you pulled, the beauty of that area is those beautiful trees, those beautiful canopies, and driving underneath adds all that value. So when we're arguing over tree preservation and all this other areas, and we eliminate them from the front yards of the homes, I mean, are we not defeating the purpose? And these streetlight locations should be directed to the utility companies to make sure that who's there first. The street trees are there, move your utility to the center of those two trees. Or if the street light is there, make sure the contractor, and I think the other issue is that nobody knows who owns the street tree. We have communities where they don't touch the trees, they don't trim them, because they don't think they're theirs. So some sort of, something from the town needs to go out to say, that's your tree, you maintain it, and you continually prune it so that you raise the canopy so that when trucks and stuff go by, you don't rip. So you have a beautiful tree, and then you go in and you have this hollowed out spot. If you keep pruning that tree and you make sure there's requirements from either the HOA or the homeowners, 10 years from now, you got a beautiful streetscape.
Okay, to follow up with that, if you look at this street in 20 years and those trees have grown big, you're just going to be, you're going to have a lot of shade and you're going to have a lot of that. But what you're also going to see, you're going to see sidewalks all buckled up. You're going to have the road that's going to have tree humps in it from the roots right up under the road. And a large tree in that is not going to work. And it's going to cost the city a lot of money. So I'm all for whatever you guys say. You're satisfied as far as it won't damage the infrastructure.
Not if you increase the width of the street, of the spacing.
Yeah, well, depending on what kind of tree you put in there. I'm not at all in favor of us requiring trees to go on private property and requiring the homeowner to be responsible for it at that point. You're just transferring the maintenance issues that you got on to the contractor, because those roots are going to get in the sewer, they're going to get in the clean outs, they're going to back up in the houses, and unless the city's willing to take the liability of sewer back up in the houses and that kind of thing, I don't think we need to do that.
Okay.
The other issue
We're
is,
simply asking questions at this point. I'm sorry.
okay,
Asking staff questions.
okay. All right, that's all I got. Ben.
All right, well, I agree with both the speakers on a lot of the comments. But I want to, the question was, I want to clarify a couple things to make sure I'm straight. I'm sorry, thank you, Tracy. I would just like to clarify a couple, I have some questions to clarify some things here. When we're talking about street trees, are we only talking about trees along streets that have sidewalks?
We're talking about required street trees in planting strips. So
Within a plan, like, for example, I live in a cul-de-sac that has no sidewalks.
yes, so if you don't have a sidewalk with a green zone and a tree in that green zone, then no, that is not what we're talking about. So there's a street tree and then there's a yard tree. There's some developments that may, and honestly, I don't think that they would have had a yard tree requirement if they didn't have with the street tree. So it's most likely gonna be a newer development, and I say new relatively because it's been almost 30 years.
All right, so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yep, no, that was it.
Oh, thank you. So not all streets are involved in this discussion from what we're talking about. Now, one thing, and step in the right direction, I think, is I've seen this for a number of years, even when I was on the Greenway Commission talking about sidewalks, is that the fact you go out and you walk and you go and the sidewalks are all torn to pieces because you got large caliber oak trees and what looked like a 5 foot, it might have been 7, but I think it's like a 5 foot that were created at a different ordinance at a different time. And so you're constantly out there repairing those, and those cost a lot of money, and I think someone in here has told me they have what that is. I know Stephen could probably tell me off the top of his head. So the small species, the small caliber trees I like that. It's a step in the right direction. I understand that's going to be, currently if you have a large caliber tree on a street and it dies, you can replace it now with a small caliber, correct?
So what staff have done is, I'll speak to the specific examples where we've gone in where this has been where a neighborhood has asked for this. So there was one neighborhood, and I'm not gonna remember the name, but I know it's on the other side of 77, where there were a number of trees that were causing sidewalk to buckle. The neighborhood association asked for staff to go in and take a look and see what the current kind of layout was of the trees that were there. We found there were some instances where the trees were planted too closely under the ordinance that was approved at the time that the development was approved. And in that case, they were allowed to remove the trees that were only the ones that were planted too closely. And in that case, it was sufficient for them. And I did work with the engineering department to look at those locations as well, and looking at the trees that were in sight distance triangles as well to see what they could do. But that's been what we've done in that case. And I know there was another example in, what was it, one near Harris Teeter?
Yeah, no, so we've
As
gone
well.
around and obviously when things get constructed, they don't always get constructed to plan. So we've got trees that are too close to stormwater lines, so we allow those to be removed. We also identified tree species that make good replacements for the smaller, older strips that are there. We've identified those, and we provide those lists to the individual homeowners or HOAs on a case-by-case basis.
But no, there is no specific allowance that it be replaced with a small maturing tree, to answer your question.
All right, and I go ahead, Jack.
Trying to clarify something.
Yes, sir.
So the staff recommendation
Right.
was 7-foot planting strip, which we have today.
Yes, sir.
It could be large maturing or even small, right? You could either, so the proposal is keep 7 with small tree. So when you say about replacement, let me just talk about the 15,000 lots that are out there today that will have either 5-foot or maybe 7-foot. And a large maturing tree in there comes out, and they could put a small maturing tree in there as a replacement. The other proposal, and it gets closer to what was already recommended, is we went with a large tree have at least 10 foot. 9 foot, I apologize. At least 9 foot, so for a large tree. And in addition to that, make sure we don't plant the wrong large tree. So there are large trees, even with a 9-foot strip, that are gonna have roots that are on top and be tearing up. So even at that, it could cause problems. So picking the right tree. So when you asked the question about replacement, I was just wanting to put it in context of the proposal that we're having, that if there's a large maturing tree in a 5 or 7-foot place, we adopt this. We're gonna go in with a small tree, and we do it already if it makes sense. Is that what you asked?
Yes, that's what I was asking. That's exactly, and I thought that's the answer that I had received, but that's a step in the right direction, because before we couldn't do that. You had to replace it with a large caliber. So this is a step in the right direction, because all we were doing is repeating the same problem over and over. So, I'm trying to ask questions here and not getting a discussion. Small cut week. All right, we currently require put the trees in the yard where? We have that in the ordinance. I think I've seen it. I think it's here. We already have requirements for yard trees,
Yes, that's correct.
okay?
Yes, and it is in Article 7 as well.
Right?
Oh, sure. May we switch? Oh. Yeah.
And so and where I'm going with this is, just to be clear, how does this text amendment change that? It increases the number of trees based on the size of the lot?
So there are two kind of suggestions here. One is that, from planning, is that you are allowed to put the additional tree in the front yard based on the size of the lot, and there's another proposal to just put the additional yard tree in the front yard. And the consideration by planning staff is that many, and I mean the overwhelming majority of developments, do not have enough front yard area for a second yard tree. And so we completely understand the rationale from Engineering and Public Works of removing it. We may not agree, but the additional tree in the front yard would not promote healthy tree growth for a lot of the developments that have been submitted. And another thing to consider is that if we don't add, so let's say we have no street trees in that 5 feet, a consideration is also that our street trees also help to replace our canopy. We have separate, which were previously mentioned, specimen save, canopy save requirements as well. And so one of the considerations with street trees and yard trees is that when a development goes in, you remove what you're allowed to remove to build whatever you build. Adding yard trees and street trees helps to replace the canopy that was removed. So if we don't have a street tree in that green zone, there will need to be a consideration about how we're mitigating the loss of the trees that would have been planted there. So that's just another item.
Thank you very, those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
Sure. I have two questions for staff and a rebuttal comment that I'll probably save for later because you want this to be questioned specifically. Specifically, across the street from my house is a home whose yard runs the length of a street. So a street runs the entire side of it. What are the specific tree requirements for that that are being proposed? In other words, hypothetically, if they were to build a 6-foot privacy fence along that sidewalk, and that sidewalk was gapped down to 3 feet, would they be required to put trees inside that fence? You know what the scenario I'm talking about. It's a little bit different because you guys are looking at front yards.
Very blunt, we have not looked at that corner situation.
All right.
So, thinking of the way that would be written, yes, that tree would then need to be moved to their side or rear yards and would be placed inside the fence line.
Okay. I think we should perhaps think of special consideration for that type of scenario. It doesn't exist everywhere, but it literally across the street, it does. And then a number of the pictures I saw showed streets with sidewalks on one side of the road. Was that a consideration as a possible outcome for this change to make it so we only had sidewalks on one side?
Absolutely not. There would be no way we would recommend as a planning staff to go back to the early 90s proposal of a sidewalk on one side of the street.
Could you clarify that at all, Jack?
I have one. So when planning staff reviews a plan for a development plan, does the developer agree to these conditions that we're putting in place? Does the developer say, okay, we'll go with 9-foot wide green spaces and we'll go with sidewalks and, you know, we agree to this concept? Or do they say, we're gonna go with 5 foot or 7 foot or whatever the rule is now, and we're gonna plant a yard tree, therefore we're gonna have to move our houses a little bit further back, so therefore we can only build 200 instead of 300. You know, so is the developer involved in this process on the front end to make sure that we're not, I kind of agree with, to me it's difficult to tell a homeowner you have to plant a tree in your yard. I think that has to be a part of a development plan.
So under the proposal, the developer would be working with staff on this. There would be 2 options for the developer to choose from. They can either go with the first option where they have, you know, the different widths of green zones based on the type of tree that they pick, or they have the option where it's 5 feet and no tree. Like they're gonna be picking and they will be agreeing with that. Now, another consideration with that is, and we are sensitive to, you know, adding additional maintenance costs and things like that to homeowners. I have a yard tree that requires maintenance. Many homeowners in the town do. But one thing to also consider is that when you have vegetation in your yard, a lot of times people are more of the belief that they do have the ability to just remove the vegetation in their yard. So by when we have required yard trees, you know, adding any more yard trees, they, you know, may presume, yes, this is my yard, but they may also presume I can remove this tree because this is my yard. And staff see, I think it's far comparatively more common that someone is removing a yard tree than they are removing a street tree. So, yes.
Just for a point of clarification, these are minimums. If a developer chose to go a 10-foot planting strip, an 11, 12-foot, that's all acceptable as well. These are our minimums, okay?
I just also want to kind of clarify. So today, in addition to street trees, the town does require yard trees. So that's been in place since 2003. And I might have mentioned this before, but for the benefit of the new members that are here, back in 2002, the town board appointed a tree committee. There was a tremendous outcry. We were losing so many trees in Huntersville. You're still hearing that, but that was, and in 2003, when the town amended the ordinance, it took the recommendation from that tree committee, which was to require yard trees in addition to the street trees. So that's already a requirement. What this text amendment that we have today is proposed is that yard tree today is a canopy tree, a large tree. And kind of following with what was mentioned by Lauren and also by Jake, is sometimes if you have a 10 or 15-foot build-to line, a big tree is not going to make sense. It's hitting the house. So the proposal that staff had proposed is that yard tree, when you don't have that space, it could be a small tree. So that's just another component. But I did want to get it, because what's happening now is we're talking about taking the street tree, and if somebody chooses an option of a 5-foot, so we take what Public Works and Engineering said, give an option, and I don't know if it would be a requirement, or is this one of the other options? That's a question I'm asking. Still keep the 7 for small trees and 9 for large trees, or do away with that and just go to a 5-foot? So that's a... Okay, so for the 5-foot. So again, if they have the 5-foot, that street tree is going to get moved in with the other yard tree that we already require. So again, we have concerns about compression with the house and how close that is to the tree. And instead of now 1 yard tree, now you're talking about 2 yard trees, or maybe more, depending on how much frontage there are, because large trees are planted 40 foot on center. If it's small trees, they're planted 30 foot on center. So anyway, I just wanted everybody to understand today we require yard trees. So I know there's apprehension about requiring street trees to be moved from the street to the yard. I'm not in favor of it. Since 2003, we've been requiring yard trees.
Okay, so question. For this motion, you're looking for us to make a recommendation on the whole thing. You're not looking for us to parcel out different options and...
The board is welcome to, that's why we put it in sections. So sections 1 and 3 correspond with each other. So we have section 3 so that the ordinance is consistent. But section 2 is separate from those other two. We want developers to have the option to place a small maturing tree in those smaller front yards, regardless of the street tree recommendation.
Thank you. Do we have any motions at this point?
I would like to make a motion that all new subdivisions have a minimum of 10-foot planting strip with a maturing tree. All existing subdivisions with smaller than 10 foot have a tree specified that grows within that space that provides some sort of canopy, so that you have your existing conditions and any new conditions, you have a minimum 10-foot planting strip. It'd even be better if it was 12-foot, but I think 10 has to be a minimum. And don't allow any more 3, 4, 5, or 7-foot planting strips, so you get away from the potential of having those tree issues.
Second?
I just want to clarify, if that's all right, Jake. What I just heard you say is you're for denying this petition.
I would modify that to 10, minimum 10, and not allow any more planting strips less than 10 feet in any new subdivisions, so that you have a street tree. A street tree is critical, in my opinion, to create that neighborhood community feel. And where you have existing conditions of these 4-foot, 3-foot, 5-foot, you make modifications to get these large oak trees and modify the tree species that'll fit comfortably within that planting strip and still provide character to that street and not allow it, not eliminate it. I think if you eliminate street trees, you know, you've ruined the feel and the character of that community.
Commissioner?
Sorry, and this was actually the rebuttal comment I wanted to make earlier. One of the things, I was on a similar track, why don't we just move the sidewalks a little bit further back? Staff has a number of other reasons, but for me, the specific reason in my neighborhood is sidewalks are meant to walk on. You walk down them. If you move that sidewalk closer to the house, it gets closer to the garage. And every neighborhood in this town, in theory, that garage is where they park vehicles. In practice, it is not. In practice, they park those vehicles on the driveway. When those vehicles get parked on the driveway, they block that sidewalk. As it gets closer and closer to the house, pretty soon I'm dodging around. And so I 100% understand where you're coming from. It makes absolute sense until you start looking at the other factors involved. And there may be neighborhoods with lots big enough that that's not an issue, but the vast majority of the houses built in this town, it's an issue. And it becomes a matter of usefulness of that sidewalk. So I would highly recommend against expanding that. Staff has heard it from all sides, and unfortunately, the new members on the board didn't hear some of these comments earlier, and that's no fault of your own. It's just what we went through, but this is one of the key factors as to why we don't want it to be wider, my opinion.
And I agree that's a good point, but the modification needs to be made that you have at least 22 feet from the edge of sidewalk to face of garage. So that means that the plane of your house can't be the same plane as your garage. Sometimes you have to make sure that garage is recessed back to avoid that. Because I agree 100%, the sidewalk should be a walkable area, not blocked by cars. But then you can't have a 15-foot setback off the face of your garage because then your car naturally is in the sidewalk.
Correct. Just for clarification for everyone, we do have a 20-foot minimum separation between the sidewalk and the garage space. That allows for a car to be parked there, so they wouldn't have any overhang.
Okay, we have a motion and we do not have a second, or do we have a second? We do not have a second. The motion dies. Do we have any other motions?
I'll make a substitute motion.
A substitute motion.
I make a motion to approve petition TA 2301 for a text amendment to Article 7, Part A, landscaping altering the space and location of required street trees and providing greater flexibility for the types of supplemental residential lot trees as submitted by staff.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Okay, Michael seconded. Everyone in favor, raise your hand.
Discussion.
Sorry.
We're having
It's
discussion
almost
before we
done.
had a
I'm
motion.
getting excited.
So
All right, no, we have a
we-
discussion now.
Yeah, would you take an amendment? Yes. All right. My amendment is to add to your motion the concerns and considerations that Mr. Patello mentioned in a previous motion, and add those for staff consideration as this were to move forward. Okay? The second has to accept that also. Well, I'll just say, it's easier for me to say Jake. Jake made a motion earlier. That motion did not receive a second, but he had valid comments in there that should be considered. I ask that those comments be added to the motion for consideration by the staff as they move forward to determine if those are something that they believe is useful. They may make changes to that. That's why I made that. But whoever made the second has to approve that.
It's acceptable as a second.
Okay, thank you. Discussion, Harrison.
Okay, I'd like to continue my discussion. I'd like to hear more from Public Works. If Kevin could, I still don't understand what trees we're talking about that are acceptable to be planted next to a sidewalk.
So and I think the planning department's done a pretty good job of coming up with the list of the deeper rooted, and given the scenario that you guys are going to vote on here, there would not be a large maturing tree in anything less than a 9-foot planting strip. So I think that from a maintenance standpoint, that does help us a great deal. I kind of liked Mr. Palillo's minimum of 10, but and then allow to let the developer make the decision. If he wants to go with smaller trees in the 7-foot planting strip, as long as that list, prepared by the planning department, again, is deep-rooted, not shallow spreading roots. I think that the Public Works, there's been a lot of discussion about the previous, conditions that we have out there, and that's, unfortunately, this is not retroactive. So, but I think it's important that we stop the bleeding and quit allowing new subdivisions to do, kind of the definition of insanity is keep doing the same thing, expect different results. So I think that, if we can stop the bleeding, we still got plenty of job security to go out, and still got a lot of sidewalk that I'm gonna have to keep on fixing because of the problems that we've created in the past, so.
Still me? Okay. I still am very concerned about option 2 on this page, and that is the portion about putting the tree on private property. I think if the city is going to dictate that a tree goes on private property, the city ought to take responsibility for maintaining that tree and for maintaining the utilities that's damaged under the tree. So I don't know that I don't have a problem with option 1 here. But I am concerned about the requirement for a tree on private property.
Well, yeah, I have some of the same concerns. I think if you go back and you look, your neighborhood, and you've probably walked some other neighborhoods, you drive through neighborhoods, and some of us dwell in the development world, and when you drive through an area, you see it from a developer's eyes, not only as a homeowner, but you look at those pictures that Stephen showed earlier to all of us of the streets and where the streets were. There are so many variables. There's look like 5 feet until the sidewalk on the side of a house. Houses face different directions, and a street is on different sides of the house. So a side yard, there's no requirement for the tree here, so I see that it's either front or backyard. But, so the street's going to be on the side with the sidewalk. It's going to be in that center line. And the other thing about, depending on how large that front yard is and the setback, a street tree being moved into making a yard tree, maybe. I understand we already do this. Currently, unless it comes forward to a text amendment to change that, I don't have any say in that. But I have a say in making recommendations about whether we place more trees in a private citizen's yard, and then making that private citizen be responsible for that tree specifically. And I know in some homeowners associations, the homeowner takes care of all the street trees. And that's not a problem. Others, a homeowner's doing it. It's different from homeowners association to others. But I don't like making regulations that put more burden on top of a taxpayer and resident. The other thing is I have a problem with street trees being in the yard is, I can't name them all, somebody can help me. You got a sewer line, you got a water line, you got an electrical line, you got a gas line, and if I miss something, chime in. Fiber optics, but yeah. And if you don't place that tree in the right place, what's going to happen to all that? And anything from where the connection is that runs to your house is a homeowner's responsibility. So now you're putting those trees there, and it may damage and put extra cost on the homeowner to make repairs. So that's why I have a problem with the street trees. Yes, something has to be done. And I support that because we're bleeding money right now, and Stephen, and they're both correct. We're bleeding money. It's bleeding their time, having to take care of this problem. And it's got to be solved some way. Maybe this is the way, maybe it's not. That's why we're talking. That's all I have.
I think we might want to table this. It's past 5 o'clock now. I think we ought to continue discussion.
Anyone else have anything to say? Lauren? Okay. Are we ready to vote? Okay.
I have to confirm with my
Legal counsel.
Legal counsel.
here.
And I apologize, Chair.
I'd like to offer a substitute motion to table this and get a little more information and discussion before we vote on the original motion.
Is there a second? Right.
Mm.
Need to say to
We're
meeting.
Okay, we're not, okay, I'll change that to defer the vote
To the next meeting.
till next month.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Everyone in favor of deferring or discussion?
Discussion, which I don't have anything to say. That's unbelievable, but it is discussion.
Okay, now, all in favor of deferring until next month on this topic, raise your hand. 6, opposed? Okay, the motion passes to defer. We have come past our 5 o'clock time. We still have 2 action agenda items. Does anyone want to,
I'll make a motion, we defer those 2 topics until next month.
do we have a second?
Second.
Everyone in favor of deferring? Okay, anyone against? Opposed? Okay, the motion passes 8-1 to defer 4C and 4D. We need a motion to adjourn. Don't rush.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
And second, we are adjourned. Thank you. Oh, but I just made a decision. Sorry, we have to vote.